Okay. Okay, it is now 3 o'clock on Thursday, April the 21st, 2022. And at that point, I call to order the special meeting of the Wenatchee School District Board of Directors. I welcome everyone to this special board meeting and thank you for joining us. Those in the room and those who might be watching us. Doy a todos una bienvenida a esta reunión especial de la mesa directiva del Distrito Escolar. Gracias por su asistencia. The first item on the agenda is a board discussion on superintendent hiring. At this special meeting 1 week ago, we appointed 2 board members to the committee charged with beginning the superintendent hiring process. The committee is reinforced by help from our friends, the North Central Education Services District, acting as our key partner. Today, Suzanne Reister of the NCESD will report initial assessments with some sort of advisory type recommendations in an open and interactive workshop style format that's designed to give all board members the opportunity to discuss, ask questions, make suggestions, and add information and direction to the hiring task. This is an information and consideration step, part of the process to prepare for later action by the full board. I do need to remind all board members we will have workshop handouts that we'll get in a moment, and those in the notes we write will be or are public records. We will retain those while we're working with them to help us during the later stages. It's important that all our comments should be professional. I want to say that I'm exceedingly impressed by the speed with which the NCESD has brought wisdom and professional knowledge to this difficult task. We are in their debt. And then somewhat personally, before handing over the meeting to Suzanne, I want to say something about what the last week has been like from inside the process. Over and over again, we would start from a somewhat fuzzy point, and then we would be converted by input from all sides into something much more comprehensive and powerful, adding lateral thinking and perspective. My hope is that this kind of teamwork, using all the resources we can find, will continue to lift the superintendent hiring task to success. And at that point, could you take the podium? Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. First of all, I want to take just a minute to thank you very much for allowing us to partner with you on this. It's an extremely important process. It's hard work. It's stressful, and it's something that is very important to you, to Wenatchee School District, to the community, and to the kids and the staff of Wenatchee School District. So thanks, Ron. Wanted to start first of all with just some considerations as you work through this process. As we look at the timing of all of this, it is really late in what we call the hiring season for looking for full-time superintendents. We would highly recommend that you consider a search firm as you go through this process for a permanent replacement. They could also help facilitate and assist you with an interim superintendent as well. When you look at doing a full search, it really does take time. And you want to make sure that you're gathering input from all of your partners, from your leadership team, from your principals, the association leadership, staff, student, and community. And you also want to have time to be able to digest that, work through it, and really look at the priorities and the focus of the district. None of this can happen quickly. There's the communication piece as well, that you want to make sure that you are intentionally planning for what you want to communicate out, what the community wants to know, needs to know, should know, and also internal communication as well. So those are just some key things that we really thought would be important to keep at the forefront as we go through some of these options that you have. And I want to say that these are options. That doesn't mean that they are all inclusive. It means that they're ideas that you could pick and choose from them. You could toss all of them out and want to go a different direction. We just wanted to come here and help with some ideas that might start the thinking and might start that moving forward in the next steps. So as we look at the timeline for what we would consider prime time for a full search for a superintendent and honestly, this is any size district. The perfect time really to start this process is in October. And in October, you want to start with looking at all of the perspectives of your staff and your community. What are the qualities and characteristics that are important for every party and any interested party in there, and putting all of that together. In December, and honestly, that takes time if you're going to do it in person or survey or a combination of both. By December, you want to be able to study that and really start looking at all of that input, look at the salary comps, determine the qualities and characteristics that you're going to want to focus on when you do actually go out with the announcement or invitation to apply. By January, you want to start looking or actually have the position open. And usually in the searches that we've done, we'd say keep it open for at least 4 to 6 weeks. It takes time to put that material together in a high quality manner that most superintendents that are very serious about this would want to do. So by March, you probably have your interviews set. So January, February, people are applying. You can, if you're using a search firm, they'll help you screen those or have them all prepared for you to screen. And in March, you want to be prepared to start the interview process with staff and community involvement. We know that takes time as well. It's probably about a week's worth of time by the time you put all the pieces together. And probably move forward with who you are interested in hiring, negotiating of contracts, some transition time, and then June, July would be a July 1 start. So May, June, look at some transition time into the district. So that's quite a large window. We're now in April, halfway through April. It would be really challenging to be able to successfully go through all of these at this point in time. Any questions? I want to pause there for a minute. No? Okay. Sure.
I have a question. So this outlines the time frame when we're actually in an ideal looking period. What's the time frame to hire the search firm?
It's a great question, Julie. I would say I would start sooner rather than later. Based on the number of openings this year, I know that the search firms that we hear about and see a lot were extremely overwhelmed this year. So I think the sooner you can start that process, the better, with the plan that by October you're ready to roll. In order to do a search firm, and we talk about this a little bit later, there's an RFP process, which also takes time. There's an interview process with the firms that actually submit the request for proposal. So that also is another phase of this that will take some time. So when we developed these options, we just wanted you to know that we looked through these through the lens of priorities and criteria and filters that were put together by Martin and Laura, the interim superintendent committee, with Dr. Price and myself. And these really were the list of what those criteria and priorities were. And I'm sure you can all read them. You probably don't want me to go through them individually, but really they talking about what is important for moving forward. So I'll give you just a couple minutes to look through those. And if you have any questions on them, we'll certainly discuss them. we'll go ahead and move right into the options then. And please know
Do
the,
you mind if I just say something about this? Because I think
absolutely.
we found one of the characteristics that I try to explain is we had kind of similar but different ideas, and you pieced it together and it worked out. But to me, this kind of a list, I'm not saying this is perfect, shows how some of the options would work and whether they hit the right targets and how it fits in their characteristics. So I just wanted to say, if anybody has any questions about these right now, or any hesitations about the nature of what we're looking for in terms of what we want to keep running well, it would be good to express it now.
Mhm.
Yeah, and in addition, if you see anything that's missing, are there any
Yeah.
gaps in this list? That'd be good to know from your perspective.
I think I would like to add that understands the unique, the diversity of our community and our student representation.
Yes, critically important. Thank you, Maria. Okay, we also want you to know that these options they're not in any order. We labeled them A, B, C, and D because we didn't have one over the other. We wanted to just give you a variety of options that you could consider. So the first one would be to hire a search firm to facilitate the interim superintendent search as well as the permanent superintendent search. Knowing that you have time on your side if you do decide to go with an interim superintendent for the next year, that they would then be able to go out and do the full search starting in the fall during that window of time that we consider to be the perfect time to start that. So we added some these are more just things to think about. What would be the advantages of doing that? The disadvantages. Are there career risk to an interim? You know, if you ask somebody to come in for a year, what does that do to them personally? Is this something that could be supported by the staff and the community? I think those are really important questions to ask. And we wanted to share with you what we felt the process would look like, because each of these would look a little bit differently. So you would need to go out with a request for proposal using a search firm. You'd need, or most likely would want to interview the search firms that responded to the request. You'd vote to enter into a contract with them. And then you would work with them to discuss the processes and the timelines for each of those. And those would need to be done the interim first, and then they would most likely go out for the permanent superintendent search. Questions or thoughts on that?
Is it even realistic to retain a company that could do an interim, get an interim in place by September?
I believe it is, actually. If you look at this as an interim and then the full search, most of these firms have been involved in several superintendent search processes over the last 6-7 months. And out of those, with the candidates that weren't selected, they probably still have a pool. Is it a strong pool? Is it the right pool for Wenatchee? That's always the question. We don't know. But I would think that they certainly would be able to tell you that ahead of time. That would be one of the questions that I would ask them in the interview process. What do you think the candidate pool would look like for an interim superintendent?
I know in higher education, there are companies that have a specific pool of candidates that's specifically what they do is interim positions. Does that exist for K-12?
I have not heard of that in K-12, but that would be a great idea. I actually have not heard of that in K-12. Yeah. But I do know that these search firms, they have a pool of candidates. You know, it's just, is it the right one for this position?
And then just Julie, you said September, not June.
July.
Or July, yeah, right, when you talked about the timeline.
Yeah, I guess I was figuring worst case.
You were
scenario,
looking
just
at-
starting at.
I see, so you're thinking possibly a late start?
Right,
Okay,
just, yeah, worst case.
That's a
but I
possibility.
realize
okay.
July, I think is probably ideal then, right?
I do want to say something for the three of you who are getting this cold. The idea of today is to try to bring you up the same opportunities that the committee had. So really, this is for you not to be shy and go for it with questions. Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, shall we move on to option B? Option B that we thought you should consider would be an internal candidate to serve as your interim superintendent for the next year. And again, some serious considerations with that, with any of these, the advantages, the disadvantages. What is the career risk to the interim? Is it something that could be supported by your staff? And is it something that could be supported by the community? So the options, if you decided to go with this, or the process would be that you could, as a board, appoint an internal candidate. You could invite specific candidates to go through an interview process. Or you could open it up to any interested internal candidates and go through an interview process that way. The interview process, I'm sure that you will want to include input from your leadership team, your principals, your association leadership, your staff, and the student and community. You at least want to consider that. And I'm sure that Kelly and Wenatchee School District HR can facilitate this, and we're certainly happy to help and assist in any way that we can. Any questions on this option? It's a lot to consider. We'll go to option C. We can always come back to these and have further conversation. So option C is that you hire an external interim superintendent, possibly one that's recently retired. There's advantages to that to consider, disadvantages, the career risk to the interim. And is it something that your staff and community again would support? The board would work with us, the ESD, or could work with us, you certainly don't have to identify potential candidates. Michelle has made some calls, and I'll share with you that at this point in time, there's not a definite high interest out there with recently retired superintendents coming back into the workforce. There is possibly one or a couple, but I don't have, wouldn't be something I could share today. We'd have to solicit input and go into executive session with criteria for that, if that was something you were interested in. She was concerned about the depth of that, to be honest with you. And the interview process could include your leadership team, your principals, association leadership, again, staff and student community. We could work with Kelly on that process as well, if that is something that you would want to consider.
Have, one of the ideas we talked about previously was an internal interim, but with a consultant, a retiree
mentor.
consultant.
Mhm.
Yeah. Has anyone expressed any, or even have they been approached about that concept or expressed any interest?
I wish I could tell you for sure the conversation that took place. I don't know, and I'm not gonna, I would have to say at this time, I don't believe specifically that question was asked. Would you be willing to come in and mentor versus actually being considered for an interim position?
I think we can come back to talk more about that later on in your presentation
Mhm.
because it fits in with that last page.
Okay, option D. You could contract with the ESD for interim superintendent searches or services, sorry. You would definitely want to consider the advantages, the disadvantages, the career risk to whoever the interim superintendent is. And want to make sure that it is something that you looked at is supported by your staff and would it be supported by the community. And the process for that would be the board would vote to contract with us. We would initiate the contract for services, and it would be for a 1-year interim while you were able to perform your search with a search firm for your permanent superintendent.
Okay, a little bit more information on this. You guys, the ESD would provide an interim?
Yes.
Okay, it's somebody that's currently employed?
So we do have staff that are credentialed. I can share more with you later. Martin can talk about that a little bit, about the request from the board, from the committee on that. But yes, we do, and we have provided superintendent services. In fact, Michelle's in Stehekin today because she is their superintendent. So we have provided superintendent services to school districts.
Okay, so I don't want to go into this if it's going to be covered further on, but is this a full-time in-house interim?
So we haven't put a name and a person, but the concept and the idea was it would need to be somebody that would be available to be here full-time or close to full-time.
I think you made the comment that people can go back at any time. When we swept through all the other unlisted ones, I think it's a good idea to go back and perhaps encourage a bit more discussion, because I think there are things I very much want other voices to come forward, but I think we can look at some of these issues. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
The NCESD appointment, does the board get to select then who is chosen, or would the NCESD choose the interim?
It would depend on whether or not, this is very early in this process, so I couldn't even tell you how many, who, what the situation is. I think it would depend on your request to us if you decided to go this route. If you wanted to have more than one person to consider, we would have to go back and see, is that even possible? That we would be able to
I think
offer
it
that.
was a contract. We would be able to talk to the NCSD about the structure, how
Right.
much time, what additional support, whether it was totally dedicated. And I think the actual, like when you hire a consulting engineering firm, you want to know who that person is. So I would say all of that to be determined
To be
would
determined,
be part of
absolutely.
the process.
The final piece of this is that we just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that there are probably a lot of other options and variations besides these four that we've presented today. Some of them may have lower probability of achieving the results with the short timeline that you have to work with. There may be variations that are viable and have important targets to pursue as you search for your permanent, working with the search firm for a permanent replacement. But for now, we really wanted to get you some suggestions out there and work with you to see what you would like to do moving forward and how we can assist with that. So Martin, do you want to go back to the?
Yeah,
floor?
actually, I want to add one little thing to that I think will help give flavor. One of the options would be to recruit internationally. It's a different group of people who can be highly skilled. In fact, across the river, we've got somebody who was working in the Middle East. And that's a different pool with a different timetable and a different kind of search and contact. And these are the kind, I actually got up to J when I was trying to write down all the different variations. And when you talked about consultant support, some of them are, like F1, F with a consultant to help because category F may not have today all of the attributes you're looking for. So there's a much wider field, but that right now, I think what is being given to us are the top of the pile that look like they can be made to happen in a hurry, maybe. Or yes, we got it.
Or with adjustments.
With adjustments, yeah. And then the other ones is there, but they could be very, very useful and diversify the way we looked on a longer term plan. And I just wanted to say that that kind of plan can be much, much bigger. So that was your question about a consultant, very much part of what could be done, but it's not right on the front as the first thing right in front of us that we grab immediately. But also, if you want to go back and look at everything, if there are any other areas where you think, where could somebody be found? Well, I think I meant to say on the international field, Dr. Price had identified a potentially good candidate unfortunately, that candidate was hired as the first choice by a school district that's rather similar to us.
Last week.
So we had what could have been a very good piece of fortune, but it's not on the table.
My understanding is they are required to give their notice much earlier in the year than what we would normally see in our districts across the state. I believe she said by September, October, they're giving notice that they're not going to return in the following year.
Guess what I was going to say is nothing is being, I'm speaking now for the committee. We're not shutting anything off. We're just trying to sort out what to put on the top of the pile. And everything that doesn't have an instant grab is still there for going back, going later. We just want to make sure that we've got covering everything.
So if I understand, option C is almost, it almost seems, I mean, it sounds like the pool of possible recruits might be, I mean, if I were to rank these, probably would put this at the bottom of the list.
I would say by Michelle's research that she did between the last time she was with you and when we met on Monday or Tuesday, that was a really slim possibility, but we at least wanted to tell you that we could continue to make those phone calls, but I don't know that she's very connected and did take a lot of time to call several and did not get a lot of interest.
Okay, and then for option A, option A is if we were to hire a firm, that wouldn't exclude option B candidates from applying for interim positions, correct?
You said it would exclude
not,
them?
no.
It
would
wouldn't.
not.
No, it would not. Sorry, I thought you said it would. No, it would not exclude them. Okay.
Do we have information on pricing for a firm to do an interim search versus a full search?
I don't have access to that. I don't know. You haven't put together an RFP and that's where you would actually receive that information from the firm. I don't know if you have it from the last time, but I
do not. And then talking about the tactics we were using, we came back in a week because we didn't want a situation where the whole board didn't have an opportunity to kind of give direction. And other than knowing it's expensive to hire a superintendent and it's time is of the essence, the mindset really was, let's make sure that we're aiming for what we all think is a hopeful outcome, doing that, and then grab everything else in parallel, like the cost.
In regards to an RFP, do we have to wait the 30 days?
Jeanette, you would know more than I would on that, but I would assume so.
The comment we got as the committee was we should expect that to be 30 days of dead time, which means we're now at the end of May. Yeah.
And you would want to give them enough time to be able to respond appropriately?
So initially, it would be 30 days of dead time to get the RFP plus the review. Just because there's an RFP doesn't mean they'll accept. So can we safely say 60 days before we can commit?
Lots to consider.
I guess it just wasn't even on my radar to hire a firm to do the interim search, so that I'm struggling to wrap my head around that. It sounds like it's just going to be too prohibitively too long to to get the RFP out, to contract with somebody qualified, and to seek applications, interview folks. I mean, that to me is not my favorite.
And
option
then
on the
what if it
table.
doesn't work? I mean, that's the other
Right.
thing. We've spent 60 days and we could be
Yeah.
empty-handed or with somebody we don't really want.
How about option B with the option D? So the possibility of an internal candidate with, I don't know if this is a service that the ESD provides, but mentor, I guess, for lack of better words. Is that something?
It's something we could certainly go back and consider and see if we're able to support that. Absolutely.
How does whoever interim, whether it's internal or an interim that comes in, if we do decide to do that with a mentor, how does that salary system work?
I would say that's, call it 1.5 salaries is going to likely be, and that would be an expense. If you wanted to do that, you would weigh it up and decide it was worthwhile. Yeah. I mean, right now, I'm going to get back, it says advantages and disadvantages on these pages. And, I think we're looking at both of those.
So internal, moving up for an interim year and hiring a company at the same time to do a countrywide, worldwide search. That is the viable option, right? That's a logical, viable option. Right.
I think the way I describe that is we're still forming how we could go ahead. There's nothing to stop us doing two things in parallel and managing the rate we move on both of them so that one of them doesn't trip up the other. And I think just from a fact, I think Julie made the comment, or somebody made the comment, 60 days and then it doesn't work, what have you done? So we're going to have an element of being able to turn back and restart. Here's something that I wrote on about option I, which people said was a terrible option, is it's still theoretical, but it's a last resort. So, we keep everything going and we accelerate whatever we think looks most promising right now. And I think when you get to the end point of your project, and we'll kind of see some of that, and there'll be some overlapping, and then costing will be part of it. So I realize this, it might sound like this is very loose right now, but I honestly believe getting everybody to look at it and get awareness, this will help us move faster next week, the week after, and the months to come.
And then you could go back and actually put some numbers to some
Yeah.
different options. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So kind of what I'm seeing might be a potential is definitely putting out an RFP for a search firm for the superintendent. Because, start now, we've got all summer to play with it if we need to and get them in place by ideal hiring time. As for the interim, what comes to mind is fastest option and maybe most viable option, given our programs that we want, is to look first towards interest internally and seeing what that looks like. And if, depending on who or what the interest is, ideally, maybe they could do it on their own with minimal other either NCESD support or consultant support, but looking at who the pool is and once we're considering it more, then trying to find out whether we need an element of contracting with it. And then if that doesn't work, then we maybe move on, but at least we've started engaging something relatively quickly. And then we can kind of work on these additional pieces if it seems necessary, reasonable, feasible.
One of the concerns that I had in looking at internally is, we're kind of a lean and mean staff. And we have people who are filling roles that are pretty critical to the criteria, wherever those are, that we said that we wanted to meet. And if we pull somebody out of one of those roles, then we've given ourselves another hole to fill. So that's a consideration for sure.
And I totally agree with that. And that's why I think part of it is let's see what potential internal interest looks like and how that would disrupt operations and whatnot, because it may not be feasible and we may be able to get that off the table sooner rather than later.
Something I had in my personal list ahead of the criteria was that our goal should be, we've got two situations: to do something in a hurry for an interim, or be really lucky and the perfect candidate just walks through the door, and then do the right thing in the term contract phase. And really, we're trying to do the best marrying those two together. So I think as we look at options, I think right now, we want the ones that we think can work. And then we look at ones that we think can work, which ones have internal and external feasibility, probability, or how they affect the operations of our existing district internally, which is Laura mentioned. Because I think something that I've thought about is we're looking at this situation without having what another enterprise would call a succession plan in place. An interim is a kind of succession plan. And it's just a thought for when you look at putting the short term and the long term together in the best possible way. And I guess a consultant could also be a kind of succession plan, a mentor.
Are there any local districts that have gone with the search firm for an interim?
Trying to think who, no, not that I am aware of. Most of those were happening in the fall time, so their search firm did for the actual replacement. And in one of the districts, they had an assistant superintendent that took over mid-year. So Michelle may have some other across the state. She's much more connected across the state and US than I am. So she may have some examples. I don't have any that I could share with you of that happening, but I've worked with a few of the search firms and they are willing to help with any of those.
I'm just wondering, my experience at the college level is if there are other school districts that have an RFP, that had an RFP out, can we piggyback off those RFPs and cut down on the time of the 30-day window?
With an interlocal agreement or something like that?
I think you have to go out for your own, right? I'm going to defer to Jen on that. She's.
Yeah, you would have to do your own, especially if you want to combine that piece, because other districts can do that, and we want to make sure that that RFP is Wenatchee school district. And something that and there are people that have to pull out. Like that.
And even if we could do that, that's a whole nother layer of negotiations that would take time, add time to the process too. So maybe there's some clever way to work around that, but I just don't know that time, being of the essence, that
And I would say most of the searches are wrapping up now for the year. They're not all completed, but most of them are getting to the final stage of that. So that might be a missed opportunity there as well.
Can I ask a question, Suzanne? I believe that some of the searches that are happening right now, that Dr. Price did contact people that she knew to find out if there was somebody on the side of one of those searches that was, readily available to, by good luck. And as far as I know, we do not have any successes in that yet.
That was exactly what she shared the other day. Yes.
But that's still something that if it changed tomorrow, we would be open to. It's not excluded if we start working on another option or another two options side by side. I know it's kind of painful, but why don't we give everybody just a couple of minutes to think and group? I'm going to make two comments. I said in this last week, what we found is the next day you have ideas you didn't think of yesterday, which is why today is kind of like brainstorming. And, if you look further on in the presentation, the timetable would be the earliest we could make decisions would be next week. But let's just 2 minutes now and pretend it's 12 hours of nighttime. And then if you've got anything else to say, please shoot.
Do you want to put that, do you want me to have the timeline put up there on the,
Yeah, I think.
it might help a little bit. Okay. The very last page of the presentation.
But just looking at the timeline, it's rather short. I'm just stuck on this RFP thing.
Finally works. What's the time frame needed to get, if we wanted to contract with NCESD?
If you voted at your board meeting next week to do that, we would start immediately working with you on that. So it would be a quick turnaround for the interim piece. Still wouldn't solve anything with the RFP for the search firm for the permanent position.
Right, no, I'm just, yeah, just speaking in terms of the interim. What if, say we explored a internal, took a few weeks, months doing that, decided it's not gonna work? How quickly I'm looking at that as maybe a fallback. Is that a potential?
I would
And-
say yes, because we will do whatever we can to support our districts. However, we also have programs and commitments that we're making. So that, how long, what that window would look like, we definitely need to have Michelle input on that. I would say a few weeks, couple weeks, 3 weeks is probably not going to impact us significantly, but we start putting all of our contracts and programs together by late May, early June. And she could definitely come to the table and say, no, I can't give them 3 weeks, but so she may come back and say, no, we can't do that. But I would say I find her to be very flexible and willing to support our districts. So. So the last page of this was really looking forward, next week's board meeting, and then the week of May 9th through June 1st, the hiring process that you decided upon and moving forward. So.
In regards to Laura's comment, regarding the internal candidate, if there's an internal candidate, then like you mentioned, filling in that position, but also looking at what is that, right here, career risk to interim. Is that interim's position held for a year? And what does that look like if they don't end up getting the position? So there's a lot of domino effect or conversations that need to happen if that were the route.
Exactly, because
yeah.
if we hired somebody to fill whatever the position, it's the domino. What's that person's expectation? Where are they coming from? What post are they leaving open? Is that going to be held for them? It just starts kind of a snowball thing when you talk, not knowing the details of who the people are and what the positions are. It's sort of hard to be specific, but you can predict some of the outcomes.
I almost feel like option C is almost not feasible based on conversations, about what we're hearing. I almost feel like it's just, we can spend a lot of time on that option too and get nowhere.
Michelle and Suzanne reviewed the list of the most recently retired, locally connected, because if you hire somebody who's not from the area, then, there's that relocation piece too. So the farther, it has to be the right circumstance for somebody to be willing to come to our area if they aren't here. But even those calls, we looked over a list of recent people and said, oh yeah, that person would be great, 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 great. And Michelle reached out to all those and got the big thumbs down from everyone. So yeah, not the entire list, but we shortened it.
Yeah, there were two things there, because when I first got this, and kind of still in standing still and rigid, that seemed like something that could work quickly. But and the way I would describe it is Michelle, in her knowledge, went through a longer list of people, thought of the people who were still current, who might have the, the energy and the will still to do it, who were familiar with the situation the way it is now, as opposed to 5 years ago, contacted what seemed of her survey basis the best candidates. And I think we have one, I haven't rejected you, and the others, no, I'm not interested. So it's still there because there could be more.
I haven't rejected you yet.
Yeah.
So
It still could be there,
It
but
could
it
be.
looks like we
we're
need,
hanging on to it, but
we're hanging on to it. But it looks like we need, an alternative plan.
So just to be clear, that whole list that we were presented with on Tuesday night? No, Tuesday, it was after the board meeting. That has been gone through, and you are saying out of that list of almost 20, we have one that hasn't rejected this? Really?
Yeah, I don't want to date the one that says, well, I haven't rejected you yet. I mean, that's
I
a
don't-
joke. It's a
I don't
joke.
know that all 20, because of the proximity of
I was going to say, I
location,
think,
because of the
in
timeline
a
of.
hurry, she went through the ones that
She
look like
prioritized that
priorities.
list.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, because that's a pretty big.
We discussed the whole list. We discussed the whole list with Michelle, and I'm not sure if you were there
I
for
wasn't
that
there at
meeting,
that
but
meeting, no.
we went through each individual and did kind of a pro and con on what they could possibly bring, if they were willing, or, would there be disadvantages or reasons not to bring forward particular people. So we didn't have her call every person. She had a short list of 8. Six,
Actually,
8.
I don't even know how many
It was
what the
6
list
or 8
was.
people that she approached directly.
But I mean, that's a big difference going from a possibility, such as they were, of 20 to nobody on that list as a potential for even interim. Okay, yeah, that's.
Last chance. And I want to thank everybody for taking this on. It's not easy. And thank you for asking questions, and hopefully we can use that to push the committee around and do more work for the board. And then you will be obviously involved in this from now on too. If that is the case, I think, Suzanne, thank you very much for giving us the presentation and laying it out. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
It was well done. And at that point, my right cue card, sorry. The school board will now enter into executive session for a period of 20 minutes to evaluate the qualifications of an applicant for public employment or to review the performance of a staff member pursuant to district policy number 1410 and RCW 42.30.110. This discussion will be closed to the public. The school board is not expected to take final action following the executive session. And that's it, 20 minutes. Thank you very much. We will recess to the conference room. The executive session is extended for an additional 10 minutes. The executive session is completed. This meeting is adjourned.